A research done some time ago discovered that children, particularly the ages of 4 and 5, can ask up to 400 questions in a day. And some of you parents remember this season of your life. Some of you are wondering why you have to go through it. I understand it's a phase, so it won't just be for a short while, or it will only be for a short while. But there's something about a young person that is curious about the world, right? Mommy, why this? Daddy, why this? You need to do this, why? You need to eat, why? You need to drink water, why? Right? And so we have questions that we continually ask one another, questions that we ask of ourselves even. But I've come to realize that there are different types of questions or different severities or impact to the questions that we ask. Some questions are everyday questions. What should I eat? Right now, some of you are thinking, what should I have for lunch? You know, we've got some options. Where should we go for lunch? I promise you we'll get you out of here in time for that lunch. And so those are everyday questions. What should I wear tomorrow? Some of you, that is a major activity the night before. You plan it all, you put it out. How many of you like that? You plan what you wear every day? Right, nobody, that's great, okay. So we're all spontaneous, right? We just kind of go to the wardrobe, open up, and like, what do I feel like wearing today? So we make everyday choices, right? And so that's kind of one level of questions that we ask ourselves. Second level of questions could be questions that are just our curiosity. Why are things the way they are? For instance, how come you can never look at your own ears? The only way to see your ears is through a mirror. You know, I'm sure you think about these random, silly questions every now and then. So just curiosity, right? Like, why is it things happen the way they do? But then there are some questions that have significant impact. What job should I take in this season? Who should I marry? That's a significant question. And so when we think of questions, they're not all the same, right? Not all questions have the same impact or implications with our lives. Today we want to continue thinking about some questions that people ask, and questions that people ask of God and ask of Christianity. And the question that we have today, perhaps to me, is the most vital question we can ask as a human race. The question is, does God exist? Is there even a way for us to know the reality of God? Does God exist? I think the answer to this question will shape everything about our lives. And so perhaps even more than who I should marry, this is of vital importance to us. Does God exist? Now, some of you might be here tuning in online or watching here, and you might say, Rhordan, I'm already a Christian. I already believe in God. Why do I need to think about this? Good question. It's a question that we need to wrestle with, because if we don't have a certainty of this answer, then our faith is not rock solid. But also, Peter tells us this in the letter that he writes to the church. He says, always being prepared. That means in every circumstance, every situation, you and I as believers, as Christians, we need to be prepared to do what? To make a defense. The Greek word here is apologia, meaning we need to be able to understand why we believe the things that we believe. So you and I, we follow Jesus. You and I are Christians today. We believe and we assume the existence of God. But why? Why do we have this? If someone comes to you and says, how do you know that God is real? What do we say? How do we respond to them? So we need to be able to give a defense to anyone who asks for the reason. I love this, because it tells us that the Christian faith is not blind faith, but it's faith that is based even on reasonableness. That there is evidence and truth that we can live our lives on, and a confidence that we can have. It's not just hopeful. It's not just wishful thinking. But Peter says this, in the ways that we respond, we need to do it with gentleness and respect. And very often, this is the part we fail. This is the part when we talk to someone who doesn't believe in Jesus, that we tend to not do it with gentleness or respect. And that's why they move away from this. And so perhaps you may be okay with this question, does God exist? But I'm quite sure right now in your family, there could be some person who doesn't know whether there is a God. There could be somebody in your office who sits near you who doesn't understand that there could be a God. And so this question, does God exist, is a question we all must wrestle with. And it must lead us to a strengthening of our confidence and our faith. A Christian writer from some time ago, A.W. Tozer, said this, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And so what we understand about God, who he is and what he does, what his character and nature is, even if he exists, what we understand about is the most important thing about us because it shapes everything that we do, all the choices that we make. That doesn't just have an impact in the here and now, but an impact into the everlasting as well. And so this series is called The 6 Most Googled Questions About Christianity. Last week we looked at one question. Today we looked at another. Next week we're going to look at the third, and then we're going to take a break just because it's a little intense. And then in the second half of the year we're going to look at 3 other questions that people have asked about Christianity. So here's how I propose we try and tackle this question. Does God exist? Imagine that we're in a dark room, all the lights are off. And there is a person who is in this dark room and it's pitch black. How would you be able to see this person? You need some light to illuminate the room in order to understand it. So I'm going to suggest that there are 4 candles, as it were, that we're going to look at that's going to illuminate whether there is an existence of God, whether God is true and real. And so the first thing that we're going to look at has to do with logic. Actually, scientific logic guides us to the conclusion that God exists. The second candle that we're going to look at today is the issue of morality. The third candle we're going to look at has to do with human experience. And the fourth candle that we're going to look at is the problem. And I'm going to word it carefully, the problem of Jesus. Because we need to think about and understand who Jesus is if we're going to know and understand whether God exists. Everybody ready for this ride? Nudge the person next to you and say, let's go. So the first thought is this, that actually, if you think about it, the world that we exist in points us to the reality that there is a God. Right? And if you think about it, so there is a logic, there's a rationale, there are reasons by which we can conclude there is a God. Last week we looked at this text, and it's worthwhile for us to look at it again. John 1:1, it says, in the beginning was, everybody say, the Word. And because you know some good Greek, the Greek word here is logos. Very good. So the word logos now sounds in English like the word logic. And that's what it means. It means the reason why, the rationale behind. This is such a powerful truth because it tells us that the world is not haphazard, the world is not random, but there is a logic, there is a rationale, there is a reason, there is a purpose to our world. And because God himself designed the world with logic, it means this, that in the world we can see the evidence of that logic. Right? And so in another text it says this in Psalms 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. And so the heavens here speaks about the world around us. And the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Here's what the psalmist is saying, is that if sometimes we recognize this, God is invisible. But if God is invisible, how do we know of his presence and his activity? We have to see what he does. Right? For instance, wind seems to be invisible, but how do we know that wind exists? Is we feel it, we see the leaves rustle, we see the trees bend. There is evidence that then will point to us of the existence of something. And so the psalmist says this, if you want to know whether God exists, think about the world. Look around you. Because the world around us will point us and indicate that there is a God. We're going to go a little deep, and some of you are going to journey with me. Some of you are just going to glaze over. That is perfectly okay. We're going to get to a place where it seems a lot easier. I want to start with logic because there are realities in our scientific world that actually guide us to the truth of the existence of God. The first is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, the second law of thermodynamics, don't worry about what it means. It merely says this, that there is energy in the world. And energy moves from one state to the other. And typically, the energy is going to go from a state that is higher to a state that is lower. Explain. This morning, some of you woke up and you needed to have some coffee. Is that true? Yes? And can I get a good amen there? Yeah? Now, why do you need the coffee? You need the coffee to wake you up. But even though you had the coffee early morning, some of you right now might be struggling to stay awake. You're thinking about the coffee, trying to smell the coffee to keep you going. Why? Because you woke up with energy, you got a shot of energy, but now the energy is waning. By the time you have lunch, you hope to stir some energy again, and after lunch, the food coma hits and all the energy is gone. So that's the law of second law of thermodynamics. There is energy in the universe, and the energy dissipates. The energy goes from a higher state to a lower state. And what scientists have discovered is this: our world has energy in it. And this energy is moving towards less of an energy. Now, not to freak you out, but scientists tell us in about 5 billion years, our sun is going to lose all energy. All the hydrogen is going to be burned up, and then the sun is going to disappear. So hopefully you're not around in 5 billion years. But here, if you think about this now, the illustration I could use is this. If I had a torchlight, and I brought this torchlight into this room, and it was pitch black, and I turned the torchlight on, and I put a fresh set of batteries in this torchlight. Turned it on, would that be bright light? Yes. But let's say I left the torchlight on with the batteries there, and I left it overnight. The next day I come, will there still be light? Chances are yes, I know. Batteries are quite good. But it would be less powerful. If I came on the third day, it would be less powerful. I came on the fourth day, it'd be less powerful. If I come back next Sunday, chances are the torchlight would be on, but there will be no light. So it tells us there's energy source in the battery that gets depleted. That's what scientists have discovered about our world. There's energy in the world, but it is going from a place of more to less. The sun itself, it's losing energy. Now, if you understand the illustration, then here's the point. The point is this. If we have a torchlight that is here, and the torchlight is losing its power, at some point, somebody needed to switch the torchlight on. It didn't just one day appear. Somebody had to switch the torchlight on. And that's what caused energy to begin and then energy to dissipate. And that's what the natural world tells us. Actually, today, conclusively, most scientists will come to the conclusion that the world has a beginning. Listen to Stephen Hawking. Some would have said perhaps one of the smartest men who would have ever lived. He says this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning. There is a starting point to all of creation. This is a Russian, Alexander Valenkin. He's a Russian cosmologist with a proof now in place. Cosmologists are not people who work for Cosmo magazine. They are people who study the beginning of the universe. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can now no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe, meaning they used to think we always existed, right? There is now no escape. They have to face a problem of a cosmic beginning. What everybody tells us is this, that if you look at the reality of our world, there is a beginning point, because that's the only real rational explanation of the world that we exist in. There's a lot of evidence for this, but because of this morning's time, I'm just going to look at a few today. The one that I think is very compelling to me is the idea of cause and effect. For instance, if I had an apple that appeared today, if there's an apple that I brought to church today, how many of you would have believed that this apple appeared out of nothing? Not likely, right? I mean, if it could, I would love to go home today, walk to my HDB car park, and find a BMW that appeared for me. It's not likely to happen. None of you right now are concerned that because you are here, somehow a rhino has appeared in your house and is destroying your room. Nothing comes from nothing. If there is an apple that appears here, and if I bring you an apple, then you must consecutively understand that the apple came from somewhere. Perhaps I bought it from a shop, but if I trace back, the apple actually comes from a tree. It comes from an apple tree. But you can ask yourself the same question: where did the apple tree come from? The apple tree came from a seed, and the seed came from an apple, and you can keep going backwards. Everything in our world today is the result of something else. Very important, everything. If you think about the fact that you come to church today and everything looks wonderful and there's a team that leads worship, it didn't just happen. People had to work at it and prepare for it and do things together, and everything has a cause and an effect. So now consider this experiment in our minds. If this moment has a cause, right, and this is this moment that marks the cause, this black bar. And imagine this to be I'm thinking dynamo, but that's not the right word, it's escaped me. Domino. Not, I'm thinking pizzas maybe. So if you think of the domino effect, right? So I have one bar that is here. Now let's say this bar is going to fall. What will have to cause this bar to fall? Some other event, correct? The bar itself is not likely to fall unless there's a force that is put on it. If you remember the great Julie Andrews, in her wisdom in The Sound of Music, she said, "Nothing comes from nothing. nothing ever could. And in that, she tells us this truth, that in our world, nothing appears out of nothing. It must come from something. So every cause must have an effect, or every effect must have a cause. Everything must be a result of something. So right now, I'd like for you to poke the person next to you. There is some reaction or non-reaction from the person next to you. What does it mean? It means this: the reaction is the effect, the cause is the person next to you. Now, you might either be happy with this cause, or you might be unhappy with this cause. But everything in our world is a cause and effect. So follow along with me. If everything in our world today has a cause and effect relationship, then we can keep going back, right? What caused this? This. What caused this? This. What caused this? This. And we can keep going back into eternity past. But, and this is the important bit, if we go forward and we say, actually, this event has taken place, this thing exists today, then it cannot be the case of an infinite regression. Meaning, we cannot just keep going back. At some point, somebody or something had to start the whole motion. You understand? If we don't start the motion, then the effect that happens today wouldn't exist. We would still be going backwards. This tells us some very, very powerful truths. If we look at the logic of the known universe, it tells us that the world has a beginning. And the world needed something to begin this whole process. Here's the other thing it tells us. It tells us that an apple cannot create its own self. Right? Meaning this, an apple will never become the same apple. The apple has to become a seed, the seed has to become a tree, the tree has to become another apple. But the apple itself cannot become itself. Which means anything within our world cannot create itself. Meaning space, time, and matter cannot create space, time, and matter. It has to be outside of space, time, and matter. What does this suggest? It suggests this, that if there is a creator being, this creator being has to be outside of space and time. This creator being doesn't exist within our space and time. It has to actually be outside so that it can create the motion of the known universe that we exist in. Second, the very nature of this creator cannot be natural. This nature of this created being must be supernatural. The third is this created being must be able to be powerful. Because if you look at the complexity of the world, it tells us that the world is very complex. And so power was needed in order to create this world. And it also tells us that this creator needed to have personhood. Why? Because someone had to choose to begin. Natural laws don't choose. Gravity doesn't decide, today, I don't want to do gravity. An apple doesn't decide, okay, today I'm going to walk off to the supermarket. The apple just does what the apple does. Gravity does what gravity does. Only persons can shift that and change it. And so what we discover just from logic, just thinking about it, is that there must have been a beginner who began this process, who was outside of time and space, who was not a natural but supernatural, who is powerful and who has a personhood. And you just come to this conclusion by thinking, by logic, by science even. Why? Because in this world, God created it, and the beginning there was Logos. Now let me ask you, doesn't this sound very much like the Christian God? It does. The most rational, realistic response we can have to just thinking about the world is that God created the world. The third possible argument here is this. If I had these pieces, and they're all parts of a watch, right? And some of you enjoy collecting watches. I don't, I'm happy to just pretend I don't know what time it is. But let's say you had all the pieces of a watch. And if I took all the pieces of a watch and I threw it up into the sky and it landed, what are the chances that all of this randomly came down and became a watch like this? Kosong. Not really logical. That if all the parts had to be thrown up and it came down and randomness and chance resulted in it becoming a designed watch. Unlikely. Why? Because when we look at a watch, we understand that there is an element of design. Somebody had to put those things together for it to work for a particular function. Our world is filled with this type of complex design. Our world is not just random things taking place. I'll give you two examples. If you look at these two sort of natural situations, this is a picture of the Grand Canyon. Anybody been to the Grand Canyon? Some of you have, right? I hear it's quite grand, and I hear it's a deep canyon. And so I hear it's quite a beautiful sight, right? But how did the Grand Canyon come about? It came about because of corrosion, right? Through many, many, many years of corrosion, it produced this. Now, this is a beautiful sight. You would say there is some level of design in it, but not the kind of design that we're thinking of. In Egypt and in Giza, right, these are pyramids of Giza. When you look at these structures that have been built by men, you instinctively know that somebody had to build this. There is just the way it's put together. How do you get those blocks in perfect shapes? How do you line them up on top of each other? There had to be some persons or group of people that created this. This is a complex design that requires the production of a designer. The other is just a result of erosion that took place. The world we live in is full of the types of design like the pyramid. It is too unique and too specific for it to just be random. Do you know that it is incredible that you and I are alive today? Somebody say amen. Not just because we have, done stuff to the world, but just everything in our world has to be a razor-sharp accuracy. Everything has to be on absolute balance for us to even exist as the human race. It is so complex that if anything shifts a little bit, we no longer exist. Do you know right now the reason you can sit is because of the power of a gravitational force. Do you know that gravity is holding you down? Now, some of you believe that there's a lot more gravity holding you down because you're a little larger. But whatever it is, there's a gravitational force that pulls us down. Now, if this gravitational force shifts, changes in 10 to the power of 40, this is the more than any kind of small atomic number that we have. 10 to the power of 40. If the gravitational force shifts this tiny, you and I won't exist anymore. That's how specific this has to be. It is not random. It is designed to function together. If I consider the universe and the solar system, planet Earth is considered to be part of exists in the Goldilocks zone. Do you know why it's called the Goldilocks zone? Remember the story of Goldilocks, right? There were kind of 3 beds, 3 porridges, right? I forget these stories. And so, yeah, it's 3 beds and 3 porridges, and one was too cold, hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. Planet Earth, in its structure, in its distance from the sun, a little bit closer, it is too cold, too hot. A little bit further away, it is too cold. We are in the Goldilocks zone. It is just right for human existence. Not only the distance that we are from the sun, we know that the planet Earth, is on a tilt, 23.5 degree. Anything little bit more, half a degree more, humanity would not exist. The distance of planet Earth to the moon, any change in the distance of planet Earth to the moon, and we will not exist because the moon, the gravitational force of the moon sort of control the waters and the tides, and we would be overwhelmed if not for the distance that has been designed exactly. You consider the oxygen in our world, 21%. Any more oxygen in our world and we'll all burn up spontaneous combustion, any less we'll not be able to survive or even live anymore. Where Jupiter is in our solar system is even designed. You take Jupiter out and we don't exist anymore. Why? Because Jupiter functions like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Because it's so large, the gravitational force pulls all the meteors and the comets to itself, so it doesn't come and destroy Earth. Everything, there are about 30 standards that have to all work exactly, pinpoint accuracy for life to exist. You think about the world around us, and it tells us that there must be a designer that created all of this. So not only is he outside of space and time, not only is he beyond the natural and the supernatural, not only is he powerful, not only does he have personhood, but we know from looking at the world that this God must be intelligent. So we've been looking at different candles that will light up our understanding. Does God exist? The first one is logic, and I could spend a long time. There are multiple other things. You can look at even the way the universe expands. And the very fact that it expands tells us that there must have been a beginning. But because of time, we'll move on to the second candle. The second candle highlights actually that we need to consider the issue of morality. So we looked at logic, and logic points to the reality of God existing. We look at now the second, which has to do with morality. And morality is the issue of good or bad or evil, right? Good or bad or evil. And the question is this. We all instinctively believe and understand that there's good and evil in this world. And human nature, right through time, have always abided by this. We always know that there is something that is considered good, something that is considered evil. Some of you have yet to hear the truth that durian is considered evil. But there is a standard of good and evil that must exist if there is a morality. Right across our world, whether you are from any culture, we all understand that abuse of any kind is wrong. The torture of children is never okay. In any culture, we understand that greed, cheating, stealing is wrong. Discriminating against one another, we understand it to be wrong. We also know this, to be caring and caring for your parents, that is a positive, it's a good value, a trait to have. Kindness in treating one another with that kindness is a good thing. Generosity in every culture is a positive thing. Now, it might be expressed differently, and we may not live up to it, but we all understand this to be true. Question is this, why? Why do we all believe and know that this is true? Why do we all, as a human race, recognize that there is some right and wrong, some good and evil in this world? Consider the animal kingdom. If you have a cat, your cat finds a rat. And your cat is hungry, and your cat decides to eat the rat. Vivid image in your mind. But as the cat eats the rat, the other cats don't gather together and have a conversation. I wonder whether this cat has done wrong. The other cats don't consider, actually this cat has done wrong because this cat has eaten another living thing. And therefore this cat now needs to go into cat jail. Those conversations don't happen in the animal kingdom. Why? Because there isn't the reality of morality that exists in the animal kingdom. But in the human world, if we did that, we would say there's something fundamentally wrong. If somebody kills somebody else and somebody murders somebody else, we all believe and understand and accept that there must be some form of punishment. Why is that the case? Because there is what we would term as objective morality. There is something that is wrong for the sake of it being wrong, not because I think it's wrong. And now understand this, if there is no God, then there is no objective morality. Because it's just then up to me. If I think this is right, I will do this. If I think this is wrong, I will do this. And it's just up to me. But we all agree that there is the truth of objective morality. And that means there must be a true north. There must be some standard by which we all are measuring ourselves with. If you're in outer space and you're just kind of floating around, and you have no point that is solid, no point that is outside of yourself, then you don't know whether you're upside down or you're right side up. There is no up or down. In order to know this, you have to have a point. There has to be something outside of yourself. So true with our morality. If we are going to have and understand why we have a morality, it's because it's outside of us that governs our understanding of good or evil. I try and illustrate it like this. If I had a phone, and I decided I needed to use this phone to figure out whether it was good or if it was bad. But what I was going to do is I had a nail. And I needed to hammer this nail into a piece of wood. And so I use my phone and I bring it to the nail and I hammer it into the wood. Now it has some degree of success, but soon my phone breaks. The glass cracks and everything falls apart. Then I ask myself the question, is my phone good or bad? Is my phone good or bad? You can't answer it. Why? because you cannot measure good or bad until you know the purpose of the item. You cannot say the phone is bad because it doesn't hammer a nail, because it's not created to hammer a nail. So morality must come and flow out of purpose first. And that's why last week we asked ourselves the question, is there purpose in this life? And remember, what we said was this, that if all we're living is horizontally, without the existence of God, then life is without purpose, without value, and without significance. And the only way to live is to live vertically. And when you live vertically, because there is an existence of God, then we can look at life and go, yes, there is right and wrong. Because there is a purpose that flows out of our creation. And based on God's creating us, we know whether something is good, whether something is bad. What does this tell us? It tells us that, yes, human beings have objective morality. And if that's the case, then there must be a good moral giver. So now just looking at logic and looking at our morality, it tells us categorically that there exists a being who's outside of space and time, not of this natural world, but is supernatural, is all-powerful, has personhood, is intelligent, and is a good moral giver. I don't know about you, but it sounds like the God of the Bible. It sounds like the Christian God. And so we looked at this. We looked at logic. We looked at morality. We're going to look at the third light to see if we can make sense whether God exists. And this now is perhaps the most subjective way to think about this. But we have to consider experiences of people right through time. And because it's subjective, yes, it is individual. But there's so many people who have experienced the reality of God. In our generation, in past generations, right through millennia, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people will confess and say that they have experienced God in their lives. And therefore, you and I cannot discount the reality of God because of these experiences. And so I want to just share real quick a simple season in my life where I experienced the reality of God. And there were many, many moments, but I want to tell you one story. I was 9 years old. My brother and I were in a boy choir, and we were going on tour to America. And so the choir was going to California. We were going to sing in a number of different places. Now, part of this tour was that we were going to live with American families. And so I was paired up with another guy. I think his name was Kevin. So Kevin and me were paired up, and we were going to stay with this American family. And it was a wonderful experience because we got to have breakfast with the family. They would drive us around. They'd take us shopping, take us to all our rehearsals, take us to the concerts. And then we would live with them. Now, the house, this one particular house that we stayed in, was a lovely house. It was a bit of a bungalow. And at the back, there was a backyard, and there was a swimming pool in the house. Now, when I was 9 years old, this was about 1,000 years ago, this was a very rare idea. And I was like, swimming pool in the house. But not only a swimming pool, it had a slide next to the swimming pool. So you could slide down into the swimming pool. Fun like crazy. The family allowed us to enjoy the swimming pool. So after the first day, we came back and stuff like that. Said, hey, why don't you guys go swimming? So we go into the swimming pool, and then we're just kind of swimming around, just having fun. And then the host, the lady of the house, comes and says, hey, you should use the flippers. And so I said, oh, great. So I'd never used flippers before. And so I go to the shallow end of the pool, and I sit down at the shallow end, and I start to put these flippers on. And then I get into the pool, and I'm just kicking around and having a great time. But I'm having difficulty with the flippers. And now it could be because I'm just a poor swimmer, but I was just struggling and trying to not drown, as it were. So the host noticed I was having some difficulty. And then she says, oh, you need to put the buckle on. I was like, oh, buckle. I looked, and there was no buckle. And then I swam around, and I discovered that the buckle had sunk into the deep part of the pool. So I thought I'd better go and get this buckle because I have now destroyed the flipper. I overthink a little. So I go to the deep side of the pool, and I dive in. Now, I'm a fairly young kid at this point, and it was a fairly deep pool, and I would dive in. I just didn't have the air or the strength to get to the bottom. I would see it would be just there, but I could not reach it. And so I kept diving to try and get this buckle, and I just couldn't. And that night, I went to bed, and I prayed fervently. Because in my overthinking, I thought the owner of this house is now going to discover that I destroyed the flipper. They're going to kick me on the streets. I'm going to be in America by myself, living on the streets. And so I prayed as earnestly as a 9-year-old could, and I said, God, please do something. And I remember the prayer because I said, God, would you send a wind And would you just cause the buckle to move to the shallow end, just to the shallow end, so I can pick it up in the morning? Went to sleep. Next morning, we went for rehearsals, came back. It was, hey, let's go swimming again. So I go to the pool, and I look at the shallow end, no buckle. I go to the deep end, buckle still there. I dive, nothing happens. So I think, okay, it's the end of my life. I remember it's clear as daylight, I'm sitting at the top of the slide, and I'm about to slide in. And my buddy now is trying to wear the flippers, and it's not working because there is no buckle. So he's sitting in the shallow end, and he's trying to put these buckles on, and this flippers on. And it's not working, and he's having problems. And so the host comes out and says, oh, you need to put the buckle. I'm sitting at the top of the slide, I'm thinking, this is the end of my life. I might as well just jump off right now. It's game over. And while I'm sitting at the top of this slide, I promise you, this is exactly what happened. He's at the shallow end, remember? The buckle's at the deep end. I'm at the top of the slide. He sits down, and he puts his hand down on the step, picks up the buckle, and puts it on. I'm like, what just happened? So I come down from the slide, I go to the deep end, there is no buckle there. Now, perhaps there was a wind. Maybe there was a magnetic force that moved. But I will tell you that day, I experienced God. I experienced something that was so personal, so real, and I call them my dumb miracles. Because nothing was going to happen to me. Even if they found that I was the cause of it, nothing was going to happen. But God just said, I'm watching over you. And the reality of that moment has stuck with me. And there are many of those in my life. If you talk to anybody here who is a Christian, we all have these types of experiences. I can tell you of the time where I discovered the cross of Christ and how that forgiveness changed and transformed me. I can tell you of when I was baptized in the Holy Spirit and how that awakened me to the reality of God, to love for Jesus and the love for His Word. I can tell you about times in worship where you sense God's presence. I can tell you about how prayer has shifted the reality of how I understand what's going on in our world. So much has changed because of the actual experience of God. And this is multiplied millions of times by millions of people who know Jesus. And so you must consider, why is this the case? If the logic tells us there is, if the morality tells us it, if the majority of experience tells us that there must be a God, then surely it lends to reason that there must be the existence of a God. We come now to the fourth candle. And the fourth candle is what I would term as the problem of Jesus. Why do I call it the problem of Jesus? Because you have to confront who Jesus is. If you want to answer this question, if you want to think about life, you have to ask yourself, who is Jesus? And here's the more difficult of the problems. I feel the first three is not so difficult. Right? If you think about it, you can come to the conclusion that there is a God. Many people have, 90% of the world have come to the conclusion that there is a God. But the harder question is, who is this God? How do I know who is this God? Is he just another being who exists? How do I know this person? And here's the way I have come to understand it or think about it. We know that we live in a finite world, meaning there is a boundary to our existence, there is a start point and an end point. We know that our universe has got a boundary as well. But we've just discovered that God is outside of this. God is outside of this rectangle. So if we are finite, then God is infinite. And here's the problem, you see. If God is outside of time and space, if God is all-powerful, if God is infinite, then there is nothing that I can do to find God if God doesn't reveal himself to me. Do you understand that? That is key. The only way we can truly know who this God is not by us searching, because we can then just hope, perhaps I'm on the right track. But only if this God reveals himself to us. If God shows us, because infiniteness or finiteness can never find infiniteness unless infinite reveals itself to finiteness. So we come to the problem of Jesus. Why do I say it's a problem? Because Jesus existed historically. We all know that he lived on planet Earth some 2,000 odd years ago. But there's some things that happen with Jesus, with this person, that is unique, that is different from any other person that has existed. One of those things is this. This person, Jesus, claimed that he was God. There's witnesses who recognize that he claimed that he was God. He says, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. When asked, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And so he has declared that he is God. Now, if I came to you and I said, church, I've got some good news. You have found God. I am God. I hope this doesn't get cut into a soundbite. But instinctively, something cannot be lah, right? Why? Because anybody can claim to be God. But the claims must be backed with the way this person lived, with the things that this person did. So if Jesus claims to be God, that's the easy part. Does his life back the reality that he could be God? And if you read the accounts of Jesus' life, you come to this amazing conclusion that nobody could do what he did unless he truly was God. For instance, he healed people. He went about and he healed people who were lame, who could not walk, people who were blind, who could not see. And you would expect, if God came to earth, that God would do these things. He was able to cast out demons. In fact, the demonic world knew who he was. And you would expect that. If Jesus was the Son of God, then you would expect that the demonic world would recognize him. And they did, to the point that they would flee from him because he had power over them as a man. And he didn't have to scream or yell. He just said, be gone. He just cast them out, and they were gone. If there was a Jesus who lived here who was fully God, then you would expect him to have power over the natural world. And there's stories and evidence of Jesus who lived here who calmed the storms. If I was God, I would make Singapore cooler. Can I get a good amen? It's clear evidence I'm not God. But you would expect somebody who is fully God to be able to control the natural order. You would expect his teachings to be so revolutionary, his teachings to be so insightful, so unique, that nothing comes close. And that's why till today we're still unpacking his teachings. But this to me is the clincher. This Jesus came and did all of that and more. And this Jesus said, I am going to die. Now that's not too bad. I can predict I'm going to die. I tell you, one day I am going to die. That's not the amazing thing. But what he does prophesy and predict is this. He's not only going to die, but 3 days later he's going to rise again. Now I cannot do that. I cannot say that I'm going to live this life and do all these things and then I'm going to predict my death and then predict a resurrection, not a resuscitation, a forever come back and forever then ascend into heaven to the glory of God. You see, this is the problem of Jesus. There is nobody like him. And if he claimed to be God and he proved it by the way he lived, you're left with 3 options. And C.S. Lewis helped me understand this. The options are very simple. He's either an absolute mad, he's either a lunatic, or he's a liar. He's lying about everything that he's doing, or he truly is Lord. And the conclusion is simple and easy to get to. There isn't the possibility of a person who claimed to be God to do the things that he did and not be Lord. You see, it's the problem of Jesus. Who is Jesus to you today? Because the people who lived with him, they recognized him to be God. James, to me, is an amazing fellow. James is Jesus' younger brother. And James, at one point, was like, Jesus, you say whatever, you say whatever. Then Jesus dies and he resurrects and Jesus meets James. And James is like, oh my word, he is the Son of God. Now, let me ask you this. What would it take for your sibling to be the Son of God? He truly has to be the Son of God. Because you live with this fella, you see him every day, and if he doesn't live up to the reality of being the Son of God, you will not walk around going, he's the Son of God. And so James declares he is the Son of God. They were willing to be beaten, to be tortured, to starve, and even to be jailed because they all encountered this risen Jesus. So when you think about the problem of Jesus, his death took place, his resurrection took place, and his ascension took place. And you would have to ask, if Jesus is the Son of God, then why would God come to earth? Because the only way we can know God is if God reveals himself. And so he's come to show us that there is a Father. He's come to show us that there is a God. But he's gone more than just to show us. He's come to show us that there is a need for sacrifice. And nobody else could take this sacrifice because the sinfulness was so immense that it required a perfect being. Jesus' death tells us that he is God because a perfect being was needed to pay for all of the sins of mankind. And then his resurrection, which was seen by more than 500 people, tells us that he must be God. Nobody else can pull this off. And then he ascends bodily in the witness of people. Why? So that we would then receive the power of the Holy Spirit. So when we think of the question, does God exist? We come to the conclusion there must be somebody who's outside of space and time. Not of natural or supernatural, not of natural order, someone who's supernatural. Someone who's powerful, has personhood, intelligent, a good moral giver, and who is the true and living Lord and King. When you think of the life of Jesus, that's the only conclusion. He must be the Son of God. He must be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so today I present to you 4 very simple candles that I pray will awaken us to the simple but profound knowledge that yes, God exists. He's true, he lives, he exists, he's active, he is good, he is all powerful. In my experience, most of the time people who argue against the existence of God, it's not because of the evidence. It's because if God exists, then there is a demand on the way we live. And that's what we don't like. I would rather not think about this. I would rather just do whatever I want to do. And if God doesn't exist, then I'm free to do whatever I want to do. I can be my own Lord. But if you think about it and all the evidence tells us that God exists, then there is a demand on the way we live. There is a demand on our lives. And we are not free to do whatever we want to do. But we then must choose in wisdom to not be the fool and say that there is no God, but in humility then subject ourselves to this God. See, most of the times we don't like the answer because if God truly exists, then you and I are compelled to say yes, to surrender, to say not my will, but your will. Not my way, but your way. It is the only right and reasonable response. As we close, listen to what Paul says to the church in Rome. He says, since what may be known about God is plain to them. Now some of you may think, hey, Rhordan, you're not very plain. But Paul says, the evidence is very plain. Because God has made it plain to them. What Paul says is this, that the knowledge of God's existence is plain. God makes it plain for all of us. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made so that people are without excuse. You understand what Paul is saying? He's saying you cannot say ignorance is bliss. You cannot live like the ostrich with the head in the sand. You cannot say, you know what, I'm just going to deny God so that I can live. Everything around us tells us that there is a God, and everything points to the reality of this God being Jesus Christ. The world created for him, through him, and by him. And so we have, in reality, no excuse. Because we want to create excuses. We want to live our own way. We want to do our own thing. We want to design our own lives. But that is not what we're meant to do. We're meant to be a people who follow, who live under, who become God's people. And so then Paul goes on, and he then says, here's what you do if you understand this truth. He says, therefore I urge you. And let the words of the great apostle Paul through the scriptures that God gives us be the words that resonate in your heart and in my heart. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, that he would come and he would take our place on the cross, and he would die for our sin, and he would show himself to humanity in view of this goodness that has said, I am real, I'm here. Come and check the scars. Come and see for yourself. The God who reveals himself in view of all these mercies, then what do? Offer your bodies as living sacrifices. What does it mean? It means this. Give everything to God. Stop pursuing your dream. Stop living your way. Stop becoming your future, but pursue God. Give him everything. Let him take priority. Let him take precedence in every area of your life. Because if God is real and everything shows us that it is, then 80% makes no sense. The only reasonable thing is to say, all for you, because you have shown yourself to me. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is holy, and this is pleasing to God. This is your true and proper. And some translations might even say this is your reasonable act of worship. See, here's what Paul says. If you think about it, and you rationalize and you reason together, beyond a reasonable doubt, the rightful thing is to give your life to God. And then what do? Don't conform to the pattern of this world. Like right now, if you are listening to this message and you're living your life one way on Monday and living your life another way on Sunday, don't do that. Don't live to be conformed to the pattern of this world. But decide that you're going to be transformed. A word that means to repent, change, think about your life differently, so that you can follow and pursue this God who's true, who lives and who exists. And he is Lord of all. So today, as we wrap this up, I know it's a bit of a train ride. I want to land with this very simple ask. Give your whole life to God. Give your whole life to God. Because if you recognize that he exists, then surely the rightful thing to do is to say yes to God. Because he has done everything to reveal himself to you. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. Would you bow your heads? I want to invite the rest of us who've been hearing this word, that we would respond to this in a personal way as well. Perhaps today you have believed on Christ, and today you know who he is, and today you've accepted him. But today you know perhaps you've wandered off, and you're starting to live your own life. Can I invite you today to make a choice that if God is real, then give him your whole life. Give him your whole life. Let him shape you and become what the Bible invites us to. Choose humility and forgiveness over pride. Choose blessing over stinginess. Choose to live the kingdom. Choose to declare the message of Christ to those around you. Because he is real. There is a God. Choose to make prayer a part of your life because he hears. He lives. He exists. Choose to walk in his ways and release the power of the Spirit of God through you, because the Spirit of God has been given to the church. If it is true that God exists, then everything must be different in our lives. And so today, maybe it's a 50% that needs to go to 100%. Maybe it's an 80% that needs to go to 100%. So I'm going to invite you. Perhaps you're in this room and you know today you need to say, God, everything. I surrender my whole life. I have no idea what that means in the future, but I surrender my whole life. I'm just going to invite all of us to stand, and we're just going to have a little time where we're going to respond to God and respond to the drawing of the Holy Spirit today. And maybe you want to close your eyes. Stand up first, and then close your eyes. And I want you to consider, is the Lord drawing you to a place of full surrender? Is the Lord inviting you to a place where you now say, yes, God, all you, all for you? And maybe with your eyes closed, if that's you, you can just put your hand up and put it down. And I want to pray with you. See your hands. Just put it up and put it down. Just surrender and say, okay, God, today I need to draw a line. I know you are true. I know you are real. And therefore I give you everything. I give you my whole life. I don't know what that means, but I surrender you. If that's you, would you just put your hand up to the Lord and put it down? Dawn, what key are we in? Can we go to G and we just do, I give you my heart? Then just as a response, Lord, I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath, every moment, have your way. Make it your prayer. Make it your act of surrender. Lord, I give you my soul. I live for you. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away. Have your way. Just one more time, Lord, I give. Maybe you'd like to raise your hands as an act of surrender. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away. Lord, have one more time, Lord, I give. Lord, I give you my soul. I choose to live for you, Lord. Every breath that I take, every moment, have your way. Have your way in me. God, the only reasonable thing we can do is to say yes to you. The only reasonable thing we can do is to say yes to everything. And so you have our yes today. We want to be a people who live with the assurance to know that you are King and you are Lord. And so every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that you, Jesus, you are Lord. We pray this in your name.